Now, this question was voted for by you, and it is, why do we have different accents? Now, it is incredible how quickly we can spot a so-called outsider. Studies have shown that we can identify an accent different from our own after listening to as little as 30 milliseconds of speech. And incredibly, we can even do this when listening to a recording of it played backwards. One theory suggests that this incredible sensitivity to non-native pronunciation stretches back to a time when our ancestors didn't travel very far. The only way we could distinguish members of neighbouring tribes from our own was by these small variations in speech, and that we evolved this as a means of protecting our own people from potentially threatening strangers. But what is an accent? Now, everybody has a unique way of speaking because of subtle differences in the shapes of our teeth and our tongues and our throats and our mouths and everything else that we use to form words. But an accent is an individual community's way of speaking as a result of things like stresses and rhythm. And no one is born with the ability to speak English or speak Spanish, but everybody is born with the ability to learn language. And we learn language by becoming a full-time impersonator. We learn to mimic the people around us, first our parents and our siblings, and then later our peers, and ultimately, in the mass media age, people that we hear on films, on radio, and even on the internet. If you never heard anything else, you would end up speaking like the suave, sophisticated person you see in front of you on Head Squeeze. And what wonderful people all you subscribers are out there. Why not join if you haven't already? You only have to click on the television. Be part of the cool club. In fact, our accents can remain quite flexible all the way up to our early 20s, and we do modify them consciously and subconsciously, depending on who we're talking to. It's all part of an effort to fit in. Even some animals will develop accents, and for the same reasons. Studies have shown that pygmy goats, as newborns, will generally imitate the bleating sounds of their parents, but as they grow older, they start to sound more like their peers, more like their goaty chums. Accents are formed in communities so that we all fit together as a social group, for the same reason that people support the same football team or maybe dress in a particular way. But language evolves over time, and so do accents. If you could hear a recording made 100 years ago of people from the same region as you would be surprised at how different they sound from you. When groups separate, then the way they speak becomes separate as well over time. Linguists theorize that if you took a group of people who all spoke with the same accent and then divided them into two, and sent one lot to live on island A and another to live on island B, then after a few generations, their accents would be completely different. And of course, we've seen this happen historically, when a group of British people set sail on the Mayflower and set up a new community on another island, America. A huge factor in why we have different accents is our wandering feet. We like to travel. We like to conquer. The Germanic people who arrived in Britain in the 5th century, bringing a new language of course, were at least the 4th wave of people to come and settle in Britain. So the development of accents is all down to the way language is assimilated. It's constantly in a state of flux. How you pronounce words conveys a great deal of information about yourself, which part of the country you're from, or even which part of a city you're from, and whether or not the language you're speaking is your mother tongue. Mastering the pronunciation of a different language is extremely difficult because the words in that language are made up of small sound elements called phonemes. They're strung together to make words. And if you don't master the pronunciation of these at a very early age, it becomes almost impossible to do it convincingly. You can't fake it. Watch a few Arnold Schwarzenegger films to see what I mean. Now, as radio and television developed in the 20th century, two rather artificial accents emerged. The first in the States was the so-called General American, a sort of blend of Midwest and West Coast accents. And then in Britain, we had RP, Received Pronunciation, a rather stilted, plummy boarding school accent that made everybody sound like the Queen. But these supposedly high prestige accents have recently been knocked down a peg or two, because recent polls in the UK show that a Yorkshire accent denotes higher intelligence. And in the US, nervous flyers are strangely reassured the pilot has a bit of a New York twang. Me? Well, my ancestors, including my parents, grew up in Bristol in the West Country of England, so some of my R's are a bit fruity. I often talk about a girl with curly hair. But I also spent quite a few of my formative years in the north, so I say one like that. These days, of course, I live in multicultural London, which is well wicked, innit, bruv?